Hi everyone, and welcome to the third episode of the VC Corner. For those of you joining us again, welcome back. For those of you joining us for the first time, the VC Corner is a series of podcast episodes designed to delve into the often unseen world of venture capital, private equity, and angel investment, essentially high-risk investing. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Philipp. Philipp brings over a decade of leadership experience all the way from Silicon Valley to Europe and even touching as far as Nepal. During his time, Philipp has actually worn many hats, from beginning as a finance consultant to his time at Google as a sales executive, and most recently, a partner and talent investor at Entrepreneur First. Entrepreneur First is an extremely interesting organization, which we'll delve into later on in the podcast. During his time there, he's actually mentored over 300 entrepreneurs and invested in over 30 tech startups. Academically, Philipp also holds a degree in public management. And outside of that, he still found the time to be a dad, a hobby chef, and a natural science enthusiast, on top of being a paramedic. So, Philipp, I really appreciate you joining us today. If you'd like to give a quick intro about yourself, that would be awesome.
Yes, thanks, Ori, for having me over in your podcast. Pretty excited about it, to be here in that early stage of the podcast. As you said rightly, I have a diverse career background from public management, anti-corruption in Nepal, to running a marketing agency, having a venture-backed startup actually back in university, then product management at Rocket Internet Venture, sales at Google, program management at Google X in the Silicon Valley, and now investing early stage with Entrepreneur First until recently. And aside of this, I did plenty of other stuff. So for me, this was quite a journey, quite interesting for myself. So I like to design like that. For some people, it would be potentially not linear enough. Currently I am as I call it, on a curiosity-driven paternity leave. We just had our second daughter, and I take the time to nose into a lot of different topics at the moment in great depth, and build my own models and models of thinking around it. Yeah, that's the current status.
Perfect. Awesome. So, look, Philipp, obviously we had a brief conversation beforehand about your career so far, and you really began your trajectory as an entrepreneur first and foremost. It was the real kind of step that you had. So, what made you kind of take that transition from being an entrepreneur to being an investor? What was the key trigger elements in your career so far that made this happen?
Yeah, so trigger and transition, it sounds like it was in any way planned or focused. It was not really a transition. First of all, it was really not linear, and secondly of all, it was also not consecutive on a timeline. I was an entrepreneur in 2011, 2012, 2013. Then in between, I took a stint at being a product manager, as I said before, and went into the corporate world, and wanted to understand a little bit how great ideas are translated into products, and products are translated into corporates or companies running companies. And then as soon as my paychecks from big tech, I worked at Google back then, allowed me to run angel tickets, I started becoming an angel. So my colleagues were rather investing more or less in the car, or maybe the Rolex, or maybe into some bought actually apartment, which is a smart investment, of course, back then, definitely. And I put it into startups. So for me, what is key is I always was extremely curious about creativity, about building solutions for problems that are out there, and to understand opportunities, understand markets, etc. So being an investor is kind of a proxy for me to not be an entrepreneur, but still be connected to that, And also Entrepreneur First was as well, it was a 50% investor role and 50% an operator role, which is peculiar, of course, because good operators tend to be not as strong investors, especially in the beginning of the career. Later on, this might change a little bit, and the other way around, strong investors are normally not the best operators. Yeah. But for me, this was a great combination, and I consider in the end money a resource, and being an investor is a great tool to distribute a resource and distribute it as a venture capitalist, or in the risk capital area as an angel, into intellectually very, very interesting problems or opportunities. So the transition is not over, to say that. Yeah.
It's still an ongoing journey. I mean, that's
Yeah.
awesome. In terms of yourself, you obviously, you had quite, you mentioned like a non-linear career. You founded a company, you worked in big companies, and obviously now you're essentially investing also in companies. So one of the companies that you founded is called Gift Me. So I guess that was your first kind of company that you essentially launched. What was essentially the biggest lessons that you think you learned from that venture that maybe you're still applying today, these kind of elements?
Yes. So Give Me I think it was the first serious venture. I had a small venture before, which was a marketing agency, basically. Selling back then the marketing concept for the first iPhones when the iPhone launched in Germany. Like a group of friends and me, we were the first 30 people that had touched on an iPhone. So we were selling marketing concepts for that as well. But so Give Me was the second company, but I think I learned tons of lessons. I made also all the mistakes you can make. And as I said, I was a public management and governance student. But I think the most lessons I have and that I can apply today is the number one is fall in love with the problem and not with the solution. I think this was really, really key. So back then we developed like an application for group giving. Facebook back then, everybody was congratulating each other on Facebook for happy birthdays, but everybody was organizing group gifts offline, and we were basically like using the social graph back then, which was really, really open, and plugging ourselves onto your web, on your pin board or however it was called, and asking people to chip in for a group gift. It was an obvious solution. It was literally the first time people transacted money for real goods on Facebook back then. But was I really interested to solve that problem on that scale? Not really. So like at one point there was a motivational issue, I guess. So this is lesson number one, fall in love with the problem, not a solution. And then I think lesson number two is like being smart and intelligent does not necessarily correlate with being a good founder. In that case, I'm not talking about me. Yeah, I met a lot of people who were extremely smart and intelligent and much, much smarter and intelligent than me. Yeah. But like they were like not interested in like being like having the necessary pragmatism to be a founder. So I think this is like something I observe until today. So being smart and being intelligent, it's a good condition to be a founder, but it's definitely not sufficient.
Okay. And do you think these elements kind of shaped your way of thinking differently? Like if, for example, you didn't go through the element of founding, your own companies, do you think your thought process and the elements you'd be thinking as an investor today would be slightly different?
Yes, 100%. 100%. I think once you go through like this process to go from 0 to 1, like literally staring at a blank white page and trying to create somewhat, like bringing something to life, you understand how hard it is, yeah, and you understand also like how hard it is when reality hits you, like ivory tower and your ideation and your like whatever you castles in the sky that you imagine that could work out, yeah? And then I think what I look for is always right now, like how close is the founder to reality? How close is the founder to like testing everything iterative on the market and actually creating knowledge versus like assumptions, Like an example is, so we once built like in this phase of Gift Me, we launched 3 applications. The first application was super scrappy. I literally built the interface on PowerPoint. Yeah, we took the PowerPoint and used it as an interface and it worked. People were transferring money on that. The second application was extremely big and fluffy. Like it was when we launched, even myself as the designer and product owner, I could not find my way through it. But other people could because they started laundering money through it. So they were using the application for something completely different,
Fair enough.
So like you learn these kinds of lessons the hard way. And I think this is what I'm also looking at in founders at the moment. Often one of the aspects that I look at is like how close do you stay with reality? Which is hard because the founder also needs to be like very visionary and ambitious, etc. But they also need to be like feet on the ground. What am I doing today? How do I create knowledge? Yeah.
Would you say then that's one of the most important factors, or there also other factors that you look for when you look for, I guess, a quote unquote investable startup, right? Is there any other elements that you take into consideration that you think are super important to focus on and evaluate?
I mean, there are a lot of elements. I think, the elements, of course, they depend on what stage you are investing. So I think this is a good.
Of course.
So I am investing in early stage. So when I write angel tickets, I'm normally the first person like writing a ticket, or maybe the second one, but it's still normally a pre-seed or pre-seed convertible loan agreement. When we were investing at Entrepreneur First, we were also the first became the first shareholder. So this is very, very early. So there's no balance sheet. There's normally no traction. There's not like any of these like standardized KPIs. So what I'm looking then on is like, I'm looking at the founder team in great detail. You know, I'm looking, how do they work? Why do they work actually? Why do they work and what they work? And what is their ability and what is their behavior in the past? And do I have a right to believe that this will continue or change? And then I'm looking at the problem space they are tackling in greater detail. So like, I try to understand what has to be true that this can become successful. And normally a lot of people always say you have to tackle $1 billion market. And this is true in a way, you know, but like, let's say like there was a market of zero when Airbnb started renting out like rooms, you know. So you try to find out a little bit more about how does the founder thinks about the future, and is there a logical conclusion, or is there a version of the future that can be logically concluded by the assumption of the founders today, even if this is not real yet. And this also brings me to the next point. What I'm looking for is I try to look at the equity logic of the investment, and this is something that I think a lot of investors always see or ignore, and I think this is also fair because we see is like targeting the power law or like following a power law, etc. But startups come in all forms and sizes. You know, you can build a 50 million equity company. This is great. You know, like these founders normally become much more richer than a lot of other founders that try to hunt for the IPO. And then there are other companies that potentially like have like the vision to create $1 billion company, or the founders say, I want to build a unicorn. Both is fair, but if you would try to build a unicorn in $1 million market, or like, and there is no logic why this market should grow exponentially, then this doesn't make sense. So the whole concept of like the journey for the next 5 to 10 years has to have at least like a 1% chance to exist. Yeah. So this is what I'm looking at in greater detail. I'm looking, for example, not too much at this stage at defensibility. I'm not looking at the tech stack. I'm looking also at early traction, if they have some kind of traction, so what kind of insights do they have generated. But that's the main characteristics.
Okay, cool. And then, like, I'm guessing throughout this process, obviously, we mentioned you mentored over 300 entrepreneurs, founders, and invested in a numerous amount of startups. What are some of the common mistakes that you've seen early stage or maybe first time founders kind of making that could be, kind of easily avoided, or maybe not easily avoided, but could be mitigated to some extent?
Yeah. So I think the most common mistake is 100% to not being close to like the potential customers, like having a lot of assumptions and like being very safe with these assumptions in their own ivory tower and not going out talking. And then maybe they even raise, especially in the last years, they could raise on a pitch deck without any insights. They build a product, they think maybe like 500,000, maybe even like 2 million, maybe 3 million. And suddenly they realize nobody needs it. And I think being close to the customer is like just everything. Yeah. It enables you to like to test ideas and test theses about problems without actually investing in anything else than your own time. Yeah, and it trains a very important muscle, that's sales, and every founder has to do sales in any capacity. Also, a CTO has to be able to do sales in a specific capacity. So I think this is the main mistake I see. Because these people are often then like they hit a wall sooner or later, and it's better for them to hit this wall earlier. Yeah, but
rather than later. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, these mistakes, I'm guessing you kind of see happen again and again. But obviously, when you're quite involved in these startups, you try to kind of mitigate that element. But in terms of yourself, Philip, one of the things we talked about, and I know you're quite passionate about it, it's talent investing, right? It was actually a topic that was completely new to me, and it's something that I think would be really interesting to kind of delve into. So I guess obviously you'd be the best person to explain it. So if you were to put it essentially into, layman's terms and kind of explain what talent investing is, how would you really categorize it?
Yes. So I'm definitely not the best person to explain it, but as we are in a room together, I'm happy to explain it. So I think like Matt Clifford, Alice Banting, they actually invented the whole talent investing piece, or like at least they brought it to life in Europe and brought it into like the 20th century. But talent investing, by now this is adapted actually by plenty of organizations. Like there's like a lot of small organizations and bigger VCs, accelerators that like use the term talent investing for what they do in a very early stage. But in the essence, talent investing is investing in the potential of an individual before they even have an idea and before they actually have like a team or something like this. And this sounds extremely wild, because like, let's say early stage investing is always considered to be the Wild West, and because there are no KPIs or no like standardized KPIs, and then you go even one step further and you say like you invest into a person, like, I mean, from evolution theory wise, like the human being is the most complex object in the universe, like you cannot boil it down to a balance sheet, and now you say, okay, I'm investing in this person, and I give them money to make something out of it, and I have no idea what they're gonna do out of it. So this is talent investing, basically. And the whole science around like assessing the potential of a person, finding this person, assessing the potential, but also like helping them to like unleash their potential in any kind of way. This is basically talent investing. Exactly.
Okay, also, and obviously that's quite drastically different from traditional venture capital, where typically individuals with quite a few ideas are going to battle out over X amount in a fund or a firm to be investing in their elements. So in terms of yourself, obviously it's purely down to the individual, right? You want to back that person or group of individuals, and you want to really accelerate them to build something exciting. So what key qualities would you say you're on the lookout for in these individuals that you're particularly working with or looking to work with?
Yeah, I think there are different theories. I think I grew up like I got professionalized more or less with talent investing during my time at Entrepreneur First, and there's two dimensions. It's very clear. It's like ability and behavior. So you assess people on their behavior based on past, based on qualitative interviews, and secondly, you assess their ability. And the ability, and you have several subdimensions. You look. Like, of course, you look how skilled is this person, but you also try to understand how applicable is their knowledge. Do they have like a bias to action, actually to do something rather than only like fantasizing? You look for leadership potential and all of these aspects. But I think for me right now, like when I work with teams right now and invest in teams right now, I'm looking like for, I think, three things, like three aspects. Okay. One is like still ambition, I'm looking like how ambitious is the person and what kind of proof for the ambition has the person delivered yet, because everybody can be ambitious, but not many people act on it. So it's kind of finding out, are you ready to eat a shit sandwich? And for what are you ready to eat a shit sandwich? You try to find that out. The second piece is what kind of agency shows this person. So agency involves then does this person drives action? There's always this litmus test around if you were sitting like in a third country. So for high agency, so you look for high agency, and high agency is normally described then in this litmus test. If you were sitting in jail in, let's say, Tanzania, who would you call? And if you would call this person, you would say, okay, this is a high agency person. So this person gets shit done. You can rely on them. So you're looking for this. And then I'm looking, how do these people acquire knowledge and skills? And this includes as well, like what are their pedigrees or their degrees at university, but it's not exclusive to this. Of course, it's a very standardized way to go to Cambridge or like in Germany to the WHU and get a degree. But there's also plenty of other ways, especially today, to gather knowledge. So I try to understand how do they acquire knowledge and skills and how do they apply this knowledge and skills.
Okay, awesome. And would you say it's typically like difficult to find people with all three of these elements, or Is it kind of an element that you're looking for maybe 2 out of the 3 or kind of check boxes kind of scenario?
No. Actually, I think you should look for much more. But at one point, you need to reduce it. Yeah. No, it's very hard. I think you should not. I think it's hard to find these kinds of individuals, of course. Yeah, but it's definitely possible. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Maybe an anecdote to like talent investing, which is super interesting. So, as this podcast is about venture capital, the original idea of venture capital is super close to talent investing. I don't know if you are familiar with that. So there's like the book, The Power Law, and there is this episode where like the Malaby, the author, describes like how Arthur Rock in the 50s created something called liberation capital. Yeah, liberation capital was funding back then the Treacherous Eight. It was like 8 insanely strong engineers in the Silicon Valley, and he liberated them from their traditional careers and from their, I think he writes, authoritarian bosses to actually start their own companies. And IBM, for example, is one of the companies that originated out of this. And this is really literally like the original idea of venture capital. Or like, yeah. So talent investing is
super interesting, actually.
Yeah.
So essentially, it's the root of where everything kind of grew from. That's super interesting. I never actually came across that before. But I mean, Philip, in terms of that element, so let's say you find these individuals. Obviously, you've seen, you're part of, numerous amounts of startups, Entrepreneur First, and I'm guessing you're probably also privy to also other startups that happen simultaneously. What would you say is the biggest success that you've seen come out of talent investing and in your career so far?
So it's a very long-term game. Yeah? So just to disclose this, like imagine like if you invest at seed stage, you need normally like 8 to 10 years to see actually if a company, if it plays out or not. Yeah. So if you invest like pre-seed stage or a talent stage, is like another 3-4 years ahead in the worst case. But I think coming back to Entrepreneur First, I think Entrepreneur First had to show like some very nice success cases very early on. Like one case was, I think, Magic Pony from them. Like the founders met at Entrepreneur First. There was like the CTO. He didn't want to actually found a company. He never considered being a founder, and they considered him to like, become a founder. You have the potential. And fast forward 20 months later, he sold his company for 180 million to Twitter. So that is one of the most obvious success cases, I would say.
Yeah, that's a big one.
That's a big one, yeah. And we have a lot. I mean, if you look at the portfolio of them and also of like the other talent investors, like, there's like in Germany now Ep3, or like there's like a global talent investor as well, like called Antler. They have a lot of these success cases. And I think every company that actually originates from talent investors is a success case already per definition, because often these companies would have never existed otherwise, And if you have a fundamental belief about like, that startups are important today to like translate more or less the progress of knowledge and speed of innovation into markets, so actually people can benefit from that. If you have this belief, and I think we have this belief because we work in this industry, then every company that is founded today via talent investor is a success case itself already, because at least in Germany we have declining in corporations like massively, which is sad. We need more startups, we need more tech entrepreneurs, and every company that's founded is a success case. But of course, the financials behind it, they work quite well. So like recently I heard like both like the biggest talent investors of these worlds, I don't want to name them now, they both returned their initial funds like more than 10x cash on cash. Wow. So, which is like relatively well performing. So it's actually like a very solid and valid business model behind it. Yeah.
That's awesome. So in terms of yourself or, Entrepreneur First or, other ventures that you're part of, how do you really when it comes to talent investing, how do you really measure the return on investment that really comes from this? Because I'm guessing there's going to be a slightly different element that you look at compared to traditional, venture capital investment, where there's already an idea or already an existing concept to straight invest into.
Starting first with your initial question, how do you measure ROI? Same way as everywhere else. You have an internal rate of return. You measure like what is the multiple of your invested money, minus like your fees and minus like whatever you have to pay to at operations, etc. And that's basically like your initial return of investment. It's the same as every other like investment vehicle. Of course, you need to have like an external signal after your initial investment as a talent investor to have some kind of like justification to say, okay, there is something like a multiple. So like the company that the individual founds or starts needs to increase in value. And this is then normally like your first success case. Has the person like created between your investment and the next investment enough traction, and enough like proof of concept, so the next investor is actually willing to go into a higher valuation. So that's a return of investment, but ultimately this is only a leading KPI. In the end, it's about like, is anybody in the end buying the company, or is a company or is the public buying the company by like an initial public offering at one point? So this is basically the main question for like with every other fund is exactly the same. Then though, of course, nowadays you can also measure like, and I think this is a great development. There's like a lot of funds that also take additional measures for like the success. Like let's say they measure like how many gigatons like is saved, etc. So of course you can apply like these kinds of impact measures on top of like the financial measures, etc. But this is then it's the same logic. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I thought there might be some kind of a different element that you guys take into consideration, but obviously it makes sense. It's the kind of, you have an idea, you invest in an idea, you invest in the founder behind it. So Philipp, in terms of yourself, obviously you've invested in quite a lot of startups, you invested in quite a lot of individuals throughout your career as well. In terms of looking at really the investment side into the startup itself, so into the idea of an individual or into the idea of a group, what are the key elements that you look to evaluate when making such investments? What do you look for primarily for the startup to have, or for the mentality of the team to have, or any element like that? What are the key factors for you to kind of tick off the box?
Yes, so I think the human aspect is still important. So, but like as you invest into a startup, normally you are not looking at the individual anymore. You look at the team, as a founder team. So you look a little bit. Do they have clear responsibilities? Do they have a good team dynamic? So once you talk to them, like how do they treat each other, etc. Like, and are they complementary in terms of skills? Do they have the relevant experience in the past, or do they have anything that is edgy or spiky? I strongly believe that strong founders normally have some kind of like spikiness or outlier behavior shown in the past. So I try to understand where is that. I look definitely into has the founder team a coverage of like distribution and building. A lot of teams, especially engineering teams, do underestimate the function of distribution massively. So I want to see that from the beginning. So building and distribution both has to be covered in there. Then I try to understand in the team composition, is the team aware of their own weaknesses? So where do they have blind spots and white spots? If they say they don't, then I'm like very skeptical actually. And in the best case, the team is already like mitigating them. And the fastest way to mitigate blind spots is by hiring, having a solid hiring pipeline. Then I look at the quality of the hires. Because if you invest, for example, I'll come to that in a second, I like technical topics. I'm not an engineer myself. I think I have a good technical understanding, but sometimes you go so deep into a rabbit hole that you have literally almost no chance to get to a level that is defensible and not embarrassing when you talk to an expert. So what is then like, you look, for example, at the hires, the first hires of the company, and you look at their advisors. What is the quality of these advisors and the hires? And then that's for me a proxy. If the founders team were able to convince them, there must be, it's solid, because these guys have more expertise than me. And then of course I look at the market. I look at the dynamics of the market. What are the macro trends? Why is there a strong why now? So the essential question is always, why is the solution not happening, not on the market yet? And if there's no clear answer to that, I'm also very skeptical. And there's normally like a few aspects that are very logical. So either it's a regulatory change. I think in the European market, that's very good because we have a lot of regulations. So there's a lot of opportunities popping up.
Especially coming up now, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So ESG or like GDPR was a massive opportunity that basically like kicked off like Personio to new heights. Then you have like, of course, technological advancements, Gen AI, like commodification of AI or Gen AI is like a big reason. And then new markets, So you try to understand what is the why now. So is the dynamic positive or negative for that?
Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And in terms of that kind of why now element, is there any like sectors right now, any kind of industries maybe that you're really excited about that you think is like you're keeping your eye on to see, what's really bubbling away and what startups or I guess at some point, eventually scale ups are really kind of pivoting that market?
Yes, I do. I'm looking. It's hard to not look at generative AI at the moment, yeah. But I also think it's like really,
everywhere, yeah.
it's really insanely overhyped. To be fair, not because it's not worth it, just because it's such a hype. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a massive technological change, but at the moment it's so overhyped because everything is Gen AI. It's hard to like see through the jungle. Nobody knows anymore like what's happening. So I try to understand a little bit the tech stack behind it. Is unfortunately very rare. Like it's not really like there's not a lot happening in Germany at the moment. Unfortunately, on the tech stack behind, but there's a lot of companies like that try to increase like computing power with existing hardware or like edge computing, etc., which I think is quite interesting. What I'm looking at. I'm looking on a more soft side of things on like the future of work. I think it became more pressing than ever. We have like for the last 3-4 years, we have like a massive rejection of traditional careers from Generation Z and millennials. Big problem, like 125% surge in job transitions, average tenure drop from 4 years to 1 year. Money is only ranking 5th suddenly as like a motivated to join a company. And every company is more or less, and every corporate is more or less wondering, okay, how can we keep talent? How can we find talent? How can we be attractive for talent? And this is just a pull factor. And now we have like a push factor saying, hey guys, 25% of all tasks in the US or Western world will be automated by Gen AI. So I don't know what's happening there, but I think there's a massive change coming for what does it mean what is a professional existence? So I'm looking really in great detail into that. It's a passion project. I'm looking into forests, anything related technology and forests as well. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I think it's a super interesting topic. The whole AI scene has kind of taken everything by storm. And there was a really cool analogy that someone gave me, saying they basically compared AI to the internet, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, where it's basically like, empty right now. And we're basically beginning to populate it. And, in 20 years, what AI will be, or even in 5 years, is an extremely interesting aspect. So all these startups and all these companies sprouting in this area, I think it's definitely an element to look at. So, I mean, yeah, 100%. And Philip, in terms of yourself then, in terms of looking, obviously, maybe you have essentially quite a diverse portfolio of companies and you worked with companies in different sectors and different areas. How do you really kind of manage risk or the risk factors within your portfolio or your investment portfolio, to be specific?
To be honest, not really at all at the moment. I think my portfolio, let's say like as an institutional investor, if you want to call it that way, I think we managed risk basically by like a large N of companies, which is a problem, or like which is also a risk itself, because the bigger your portfolio, the more Gaussian it probably gets, and that's all you want to avoid. You don't want to have a Gaussian curve, you want to have a power law, yeah. So I think how did I try to mitigate risk there is like by trying to avoid Gaussian curves, to be fair. You not cut the heavy ends of like of the distribution, because the heavy ends of the distribution is actually what you want. But this is, I think, a conflict that comes with scale. And I think for me privately, how do I manage my risk? I think I have by now like a relatively strong deal flow with very deep insights on the founders that I normally like get. So I literally like invest basically only on like a talent thesis, and also privately, but normally like I know the founders a little bit longer, or I have like informal information around them, but I went like in preparation of our conversation, I went like to my private portfolio, and I literally saw that every one of these founders had like really strong outlier behavior very early on in their career or in the studies, or they did something that was like very counterintuitive, or achieved outstanding results. So one of the companies I recently invested in, like the founders, the first job they had was basically building up like, and the Russian Zalando, you know Zalando?
Yeah,
So
of
they
course.
built like almost $1 billion e-commerce company when they were like early 20s. So
Wow.
it's always literally the people, and the whole assumptions around the market, etc. You only look into, does it make sense logically? Because the worst thing that can happen is that you, as a investor who spent maybe like an hour or like maybe 2 hours like on the deal yet, yeah, that you find the logical holes, or that you can actually really like counter argue and win an argument in that case. And this should never be the case. So, but other than that, I don't manage the risk, to be fair.
That's fair enough. And in terms of your kind of background, Philip, obviously we mentioned in the beginning, you worked through quite a non-linear career. One of your stops in your career was actually at Google and Google X. A lot of people have this perception around Google and how working at Google is, and life at Google, how it, it kind of shapes an individual as well, propelling them forward in their career. What would you say your kind of perception from working at Google and Google X was like?
Yes. So while I was at Google, I wasn't sure it was propelling me forward, actually. But I must say, like, once you leave Google, you understand like how excellent this company is set up and what you just learn by just being there. And I think one of the biggest, most important thing that you also can learn as a leader is just like the culture, like also just around like diversity and inclusion, around fairness, and around like also data-driven decision making, like how deeply it's ingrained, and the transparency of leaders. So it's unbelievable. It's unseen in Google, and like seeing like a lot of other companies, you're just sometimes quite shocked and like baffled about like the level of transparency, and also like how unprofessional communication is handled in these kind of companies. And Google does an excellent job there. Excellent. I mean, this starts with like Larry and Sergey. They were, I think, until 2016 or something. Every Friday, they stand 2 hours on stage and asking every single answer about like the company. And back then, the company already made like 120 billion revenue a year, and it still did find time for that.
Wow.
And absolutely there were no like no-goes. You could ask everything. So this is just like pretty exceptional. And on Google X, I think it was just like exceptional engineers and thinkers, and like the ability to move between macro and micro was like impressive. I've never seen that again. It's basically, I can remember I was in one of these design reviews, and there were like the local leaders, and Astro Teller stepped in as well for a while. Like Astro Teller is like the head of Google head of Google X, and he basically explained what is the 70 or 50 or 70 year version or vision for this company and for this project that everybody was working on. But I could also say exactly why it's very important that you like do this ABC next week. And it was logical. It made sense, and this like level of like, moving between macro and micro and like declining the vision in that way, that's just something that is very, very useful. And Google is very good in doing that. Yeah. And
Awesome.
then I think last but not least, there is like this sense of abundancy, or it was, I'm not sure it's still the case in Google, but there was a sense of abundancy in Google.
Definitely
I
changed,
don't know the micro kitchen full of sweets, but also just like in terms of resources. If you could argue why something makes sense, like you will get the resources, And this started like just with these 20% projects. Are you aware of these?
No, I've actually not
So
heard of that before.
20% projects is like every employee in the earlier days of Google. I think by now this changed as well, but I still witnessed this, was allowed to spend 20% of their time, their working time, on different projects, on their own projects. And a lot of Google innovations actually originated from these projects. I think Google Maps, for example, is one of these.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is just like pretty mind-baffling, that the level of trust that you have into your employees and into your talent, and the belief in innovation and progress, that you foster this that way, so that you are not like more or less using as a company your workforce and octroy them like 120% of the daily schedule to like execute given tasks, but you give them consciously free time to explore whatever they want because you believe so much into their potential. And I think this belief is like is probably still, I'm not there like for 4 years, it's like still weaving very deeply into the company, and that's unique.
Yeah, 100%. I hear about a lot of people that, were Google, obviously like big tech, but specifically like at Google, and they have that kind of entrepreneurial push afterwards. I mean, you've probably seen this as well. In terms of your time at Google, you've probably seen a lot of innovative startups kind of, branch off, like people who used to work at Google or people who were part of your teams just basically decided to, maybe they had an idea or maybe they got exposed to a certain experience. And they really had that element kind of propelled forward. So I guess, Philipp, in your perspective, do you think that kind of changed your approach to looking at innovative startups? Do you think that kind of maybe changed your point of view of how people who come from companies like Google essentially think or approach these kind of elements?
Yes, I would say, coming back to what I said before, the sense of abundancy and this like really like radical belief in innovation and progress, and that innovation is possible. I think this changes you like more than you would probably assume. Yeah, and also like this basic trust of people's ability to learn and develop and like create stuff. I think that changes. That's very different from like traditional companies, and I think this is a good experience to make to do.
So, Philipp, in terms of your stuff, obviously you've probably seen quite a lot of individuals kind of branching off from Google, kind of branching into their own startups or having that kind of entrepreneurial mindset, leaving Google or Google X. Do you think that kind of changed your point of view when investing in startups or looking at individuals who leave big tech or specifically Google?
So I think, first of all, the people who leave Google, I have a lot of respect for them. The people who leave Google to start something on their own, I have a lot of respect for them because they leave a golden cage. Okay. So they leave a like pretty like safe life with a pretty good career and very, very nice work environment to start something on their own. So this kind of determination is already like pretty impressive from my point of view, to be fair. And secondly, yes, I think I would like to invest like in people that had like a impact in a Google product or Google, yeah, because what you can rely on is often that they have like just like a very strong tool set of management tools, of like they went to like solid performance management. They have like pretty high standards of like doing stuff or getting shit done. So probably not all departments, as it always the case, but like on the engineering department, work department, etc. I think it's I would say it's like it's a good indicator. Yeah. It's a good school.
No, I think that's also, there's a lot of individuals I've actually spoken to, and you hear some of the ideas that flow around, after leaving such companies, and I think it's definitely an interesting element to look at and also, explore as an investor from your perspective. So, Philipp, from your perspective, then kind of going back to that element, as an investor, you mentioned obviously you're an investor, you're also an advisor. How do you make how do you distinguish between the two? When do you decide to be purely an investor? When do you decide to also become an advisor to a startup? Or do you always have a combination of both?
Yeah, I think if you agree to be an investor into a startup, you're always an advisor as an angel. Yeah, I think you need to add something more than money. If the company is really like, company really needs your money, I think you should not invest as an investor. So normally as an angel, you should add something more. Either it's network, it's a specific knowledge, it's like specific ability, something in that direction. But when I decide to be an advisor and not an investor, I think then the risk profile of this company is just like too odd for me, or the risk return profile is just too odd for me. So this is, for example, if a company is tackling like a crowded 100 million market for 50 million market. Yeah. And there's no like very positive dynamics around that this market is supposed to grow or lift off. I would say, hey, and I like the founder team a lot. I would say like, guys, happy to be an advisor and no shares or whatever, but like just support you on your journey, because it's a small ecosystem, and in the end, they need support, and normally it's pretty fun to work with them as well. So like if there's a personal connection, I'm happy to do advisory, and if my schedule allows, to be fair as well. Yeah,
yeah, 100%. I think it's an interesting element. Most of the time when, especially like young startups, first-time founders, they need to rely on their investors, experience and mentorship, as well to hopefully, avoid certain pitfalls or certain mistakes that they could have made. So in terms of that kind of element, so when you're looking at startups, once you find, a startup that you like or individuals that you're like, I want to back these guys all the way, what's the due diligence process that you typically go through? Like, what do you want to see from them, and what do you want to kind of have a look at, making sure that it is the right investment to invest in?
So normally, if I get a relative. So I have a lot of inbound deals that just pop up, and normally, to be honest, if they are just anonymous, I don't find often the time to look at them, etc. If they come by a recommendation, I definitely look at them. If it's a market I understand, I directly look at the team, etc., and I look at the pitch deck, and I will decide if I want to have a session with them, etc. If it's a market that I don't understand, but I like the team, I probably reach out to a friend who's investing in that space, or who is an expert in that space. Or I ask ChatGPT occasionally as well, and ask, okay, what are the X's actually that this space is developing? Yeah. What should you watch out, etc. So what are macro dynamics in the space? And then normally I go into a first conversation with the founders and ask them for a pitch. Yeah, or I ask them as well, what are their open questions? What have they learned? So, and I ask them to pitch a session for me. And then I give normally feedback. And the feedback is relatively direct and relatively straightforward. I ask them to share me the deck, or in best case a slide, or share me the data room. And then I comment directly into the slides, into the deck. And then I see how are they answering? Do they take the time to answer, to give me to do another session with me? So I try to observe as well how the feedback is taken. And then I try to understand, maybe in a week later, if we have the time, I do another conversation with them. And then I want to just understand, what did they manage in the last week? Because, at this early stage where I'm investing, the most important thing is, the rate of development, so the productivity of a team. And for that, you need at least 2 points in time that you can observe. And the first time is pretty skewed, because the first time you don't know exactly how much time have they invested in the pitch. They can fake a lot, they can do a lot of bum around the model and around their answers, etc. But if you then have a second session a week later and you ask, okay, what happened in this week, and nothing happened, then this is normally not so cool. So you try to have more than one observation points.
Okay, and in terms of that process, so I don't know obviously about yourself, but some investors like to invest with other investors, or you mentioned sometimes you're not the first person to write the ticket, sometimes you join a later round potentially. So how do you really kind of approach co-investment? Do you like going in with other investors, or do you prefer to invest by yourself and kind of back the ideas that you really like?
Yeah, so to be honest, I like to co-invest, definitely. Okay. But we have our small networks of angels and we send each other deals, a lot of deals, and there's a few investors in there as well, institutional investors in there. So normally there is some kind of traction on the deals. What you look at when you co-invest, you look at the quality of the co-investors, of course. What kind of names are there? Are these names strong? I often try to understand. Because it's quite easy to have a strong name as a co-investor, but let's say if a almost billionaire invests a 100K ticket, that doesn't say much for me, So what I try to understand is a little bit how much skin is in the game of the co-investors, and then I try to understand why do they believe in that? Do they believe in that because they have no clue, or do they believe in that because they have they have a lot of knowledge about the space? And then I look how much skin do they give into the game. That's an indicator for me that I try to evaluate. Yeah. Especially on the institutionals. On the institutionals, of course, the names and the ticket sizes, and that's more standardized. Yeah, so you understand that quite well. Yeah.
So in that kind of approach, obviously there's a little bit more kind of a safety element, if that makes sense. There's a lot more investors involved. There's a lot more kind of capital to also be accessed. In terms of yourself, so obviously we touched on, the element of selling out. We touched on the element of IPO. We touched on all those kind of things. What are really the strategies that you go for when you look for an exit from a startup? Do you mainly go for the IPO side, the ones that want to become, unicorns and then eventually IPO themselves, or do you look for the startups that have a cool idea that could potentially be bought out, like you mentioned, by Twitter or by some of the big companies out there?
Yes. So to be honest, I used to like look much more like as a private angel. I also looked more at the ambitious, like massive scale potential IPO candidates. By now, I don't do this anymore. So I still I still like if these companies have the potential for that, of course. But I like models that also can generate like massive value and like a potentially mid-market, top market mid-market PE exit, or like strategic acquisition from like like a larger platform player, etc. It depends. Like the idea, the vision has to fit to the founders, but just in terms of like a value generation and return generation, like this mid-market segment can be quite attractive, and especially when you work with more seasoned founders. If you work with like serial entrepreneurs who have done that like 2-3 times, it's just like much less risk, to be fair.
Fair enough. Obviously, that kind of experience comes into play, and obviously, the early founders would rely more on yourself, to kind of give them advice and kind of guide them along that route. So once you invest in a startup, so let's say you invest in individuals, you kind of back them, or you invest in an idea. How do you really manage the kind of investor-founder relationship after you invest? What does that kind of look like for you?
Normally, in the beginning, it's they go into a fundraise relatively shortly after like the angel tickets. So, and I can support a lot there. So I did like a lot of deals, have a lot of network. I can definitely like help them with a narrative and like get a story into place, get the insights well presented, or ensure that they have enough insights. But they should have, because I already invested in that case. So they should have insights. So I can help there, and this is pretty hands-on normally. Of course, only when the founders do want that. And then later on, I think this you just retract. Now sometimes you have like a deep, very good connection with the founders, and then maybe like you coach them. So like I have one founder, like one portfolio company, and became very, very good friends with the founder. So we more or less discussed everything of the company. But this is not like the standard. The standard is basically you are like always on WhatsApp. Maybe you have a Slack channel together. You always like work on like market access. So you always have like, if you're a networker, you always get access to potential clients, to potential partners. So you do like double opt-in intros between them. And I think you act more or less as a unofficial BD support. And then for ad hoc questions, you step in. Yeah.
Awesome. It's quite interesting to see, obviously, the diverse elements of how potentially, you interact, and how different people can interact with their portfolios and the founders they invest in. So, Philipp, obviously, in terms of your stuff, you've been exposed to pretty much a global ecosystem of startups, from pretty much all regions, the major regions, obviously being Silicon Valley and Europe. How do you think these startup ecosystems kind of differ themselves in different geographical areas?
Yes, so I think you have like different ecosystems already in Europe. Like even Europe is pretty fragmented. Like even on a smaller scale, even in Germany, you have different ecosystems, which is interesting. Yeah. So let's go from macro to micro. So I would say, what is the biggest difference between Silicon Valley and Europe is Silicon Valley is basically one massive big hub with lots of history and with like a almost fully working ecosystem. So you have like a talent influx system via Stanford University and Berkeley, etc., which is like top universities, which are very closely connected to venture capital, strong research departments, and the transfer from research department to like actually founding a tech company is like very, very easy and very quickly. You have like the early acceleration programs, you have like the product market fit programs like Y Combinator, you have programs that foster people long time before they want to be a founder, actually, so there's really like a full funnel from individual to becoming a founder to becoming an exited founder to become an investor. It's like in a very, very dense ecosystem reflected, which is great. Yeah. And there's of course like a different mentality about like massive risk taking, also on deep tech innovation. So it's very, very different to Europe. Like if you compare this to Germany, first of all, I mean, I think until recently only like 11% of people under 25 or under 30 said they want to become founders. Yeah, so there's not this massive acceptance of like being a founder and like failing forward to create a career as an entrepreneur. This changes slightly over time. Also, engineering and business is pretty much separated in Germany. Until recently, like we had significantly more like business founders than engineering founders in Germany. I think like last year or the year before, actually, technical founders overcame business founders for the first time.
Really?
In Germany, yeah, in total numbers, yeah, or new total numbers of new incorporations.
Wow.
Yeah, and then of course, like the capital that is deployed in Germany is still much more risk averse than the capital in the US. So, for example, when we had companies that we were preparing for the US fundraise versus the Europe fundraise or German fundraise, we had to completely rewrite the decks, like the slides. We had to retrain the founders on like investor communication, etc. Because in the valley, you basically start with like a massive, bold vision about how you change the future. Yeah. So if you, for example, like this is a real story, you tell like, okay, I want to double human lifespan, then you have the attention, you know. But if you say you want to develop a new drug to increase life expectancy, nobody is going to listen to you. And I think this is true, like in the ecosystem, and I think this makes something as well with like the visions of like the people, or like the visions that are allowed to enter like the venture capital market. So the visions that you see like in Germany, they are relatively sober normally, which is kind of funny because like there's top tech talent. The talent that comes from Germany is definitely comparable to the talent that is in Stanford, etc. The problem is only like that it's like when they want to become a founder, they leave Germany and they go to Stanford for the post PhD, etc. Because then they have already access to the interesting problems. I recently had a conversation as an anecdote with like a PhD from TU Berlin who was in a research group of like exceptional AI engineers. The research group, he said, like considered I think 5 to 6 people. And all of them wanted to work in Germany on AI topics, and none of them found a job. None of them found a job that was interesting enough to get them. So all of them work now for US companies, in the Valley, and are based in Germany. Some are even based like in East Europe on a US salary, which is great, But I think this is kind of scary as well. So this is a difference. The level of ambition and the level of ambition and the level of boldness and risk taking is just like a different game over there. Point. Yeah. In Germany, we sometimes had investors telling us that the founders, the very ambitious technical founders, are too ambitious, and there is simply nothing like too ambitious in the Valley.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think there's definitely, at least from clients that I've had or individuals I've spoken to, there's definitely a bias from an investor's perspective to look at the US in that kind of element. So there's definitely that kind of side to look at, startup ecosystem as well that startups kind of create in the US compared to Europe, even though, Germany is now becoming, in the last 10 years especially, a startup capital, right? There's so many startups sprouting, but there's still that kind of higher risk element for investors looking at startups within Europe compared to the US. I mean, in terms of your kind of perspective, Philip, do you think, having an international kind of look at that kind of ecosystem, do you think it poses more challenges, or do you think it kind of opens more opportunities? What kind of elements do you think are really important factors to consider?
I feel occasionally like that the regulatory environment and the speed of our regulatory environment is not very beneficial and good for like people who want to create large impact, and strong entrepreneurs want to create often like large impact. So, and the question is, when they can create more impact in the US than actually, or maybe soon in India, than in like Europe or in Germany, then we're going to have a brain drain in that direction. And there's not much that the individual VC can do about that, to be fair, here locally. Okay. I think it's a risk. I think it's a massive risk at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting element. So in terms of yourself, kind of looking at specifically the Berlin startup scene, we mentioned, Berlin has pretty much in the last 10 years exploded in terms of entrepreneurs and investments. And, everything alike. It's really becoming like a startup capital. There's startups sprouting across all industries within Germany, but also obviously, Berlin, kind of looking at that. What's your perspective on that? Do you think that trajectory is going to continue? Do you think there's going to be elements we're going to see slightly differently? Obviously, since it's quite a new element for Germany to explore.
I do believe that the Berlin ecosystem had like a very, very strong run in the last years, and it's still very attractive for international talent. But I think there's a lot of very interesting and more ambitious innovation happening now in Munich. Also, Munich overcame Berlin last year for the first time in incorporations, but per 100,000 inhabitants. But I would say, like as a VC, you look at trajectories, and the trajectory of Berlin is not as steep as the one in Munich. So I think this is quite interesting.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of startups sprouting. Actually, I'm working with quite a few startups now in Stuttgart, and there's a lot of cities that are now essentially starting to hub themselves in different kind of parts of Germany, where it used to be purely, if you want to have a company, you want to incorporate a new startup, it used to be go to Berlin and essentially incorporate it there.
Exactly. I think Berlin has to reinvent itself to be fair, like to stay attractive over time. I think they still cool, still attractive, and it's like a fantastic city, but to stay attractive over the next 5 to 10 years, I think they have to reinvent and find a new model, because Berlin got so big because of like the early Team Europe ventures and Rocket Internet, who like were specialized in copying business models from the US and then deploying them in Germany. And they were basically all incorporated in Berlin, most of them. And that made a lot of people very, very rich, and also like created a lot of like secondary markets, etc., which then more or less built like the ecosystem in Berlin. But now suddenly what like TU Munich did, etc., they managed like to create ecosystem where a knowledge transfer of like research students or like exceptional talent in general into like startups is working quite well. Really, really well, to be fair. They have access to a lot of industrial monies, like from the automotive industry, from chemical industry, etc., that's funding that. And they just create like a massive flywheel right now. So the South is catching up very much. I even read lately that Baden-Württemberg, one of the countries in Germany, the southern countries, is, I think, under the top 5 innovative regions next to Silicon Valley globally. And it's not Berlin.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and it's basically the home of the German Mittelstand. So I'm very happy that something is happening there.
No, it's definitely a dynamic environment to be in. Germany as a whole is a super interesting market to keep an eye out, generally in the startup scene. So, Philipp, in terms of yourself, obviously we kind of talked through the beginning till, where you are now and the kind of things you're doing now and perspectives you have. I guess one thing is that really kind of interests me, and I love to kind of find this out from individuals. Throughout your career, you've probably spoken to a lot of influential people. You've spoken to a lot of very smart people. What would you say is the best piece of advice someone gave you, either at the beginning, middle of your career, or where you are now, that you've received so far?
Oh, the single best piece of advice.
If you have one.
The single best piece of advice I would say is something around trust your gut feel, to be honest.
Okay.
I mean, your gut feel is basically your own unsupervised machine learning system, that digests much more signals that you can actually consciously understand. So if there's something, and you should trust it. It guides you normally the right way, to be fair.
I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that concept. I think trusting your gut feeling is always an element to kind of keep in mind. And in terms of yourself, obviously, you have a crazy busy schedule. I'm guessing in terms of, the portfolio companies you're managing, the personal stuff you have. How do you kind of manage your work-life balance? Obviously, it's quite a big topic for a lot of people now, kind of making sure there's an even balance between, work and personal life. What is it that you do essentially to kind of make sure that balance is still there?
Yeah, it's a topic that I struggled a lot with over like the years, to be fair, and like also lost it from time to time massively. But by now, like I have a very hard cut that I like spend time with my family, like for breakfast and for dinner. And other than that, I think work versus life is not really working for me. So, I love my work and I love my life, and I'm on paternity leave and I'm still working like insanely much because I just like it a lot. What is very important for me instead, and I think is, how do you manage to have like a presence in what you're doing? So how to manage to be 100% present in what you are doing. And this means, how are you present with the work that you do right now? How are you present when you are with your kids? How are you present when you're with your wife, when you do sports, and you are really there? And this is, if you manage this, a lot of other problems and a lot of other balances more or less fall in place, I figured out. And simply like almost everybody tells you nowadays, I think meditation helped a lot for me. Meditation, good nutrition.
I've actually heard that quite a lot.
It's just the simple things,
100%. And I think a lot of people kind of, sometimes get so engrossed into the work or so engrossed into, having that kind of balance that it's hard to find that kind of equilibrium. But obviously, I think you're 100%, you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned, kind of being present in that moment when you're doing what you're doing. So, I mean, in terms of this is also kind of a question I love to kind of see. If you were to describe, your investment philosophy in just one word, what would that be for you?
People. It's all about people, only people. Nothing else for me.
I think we got that element through the conversation we've been having so far. No, but that's awesome. Obviously, I think, it's definitely a way to look, when you back the people that have the idea and you really back the individuals, I think that's the way to go forward.
Yeah, but also, how does it impact people? I think if you understand this, it's in the end, I think for me, that's the key. That's what I strive to understand, what I want to understand better and better every day. Yeah.
No, that's really interesting. So in terms of that kind of side of things, in terms of kind of having that perspective, is there any kind of like resources and or books or any kind of elements like that you've read in the past or essentially seen that you think would be really like, useful, beneficial for entrepreneurs or investors as well, like stuff that you've kind of benefited from?
2 books and a few essays, I would say, but it's Discipline Entrepreneurship. The book about effectual entrepreneurship is, from my point of view, really, really good. I would say read the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, the founder of AngelList. He just gives you like a very good set of priorities, and he gives you like a very good advice on how to leverage yourself and how to productize yourself. I think this is really, really key in today's environment. And then basically all the essays of Paul Graham are just fantastic thinking and really, really life-changing advice for aspiring entrepreneurs, to be fair.
I think that's definitely good resources and good tools. I think there's so many things out there, especially coming out now, for people who have been there essentially and done that, that kind of element, and they give so much advice in these elements for founders and investors, and it's definitely like resources that they can leverage off of. I guess one really interesting thing that I'm really curious to find out from you, Philipp, I'm guessing you have something that you kind of always thought about, like maybe it's a startup that you've seen that you potentially maybe had a chance to invest, or maybe a startup that you wanted to invest into. What would be essentially like a startup that you wish you invested into, whether it's while you were an investor or even before that?
So I think a startup, if I would have had a chance back then, I would have had a chance if I would have pushed for it. I would like to invest in a Selvera. They tried to bring more or less more transparency into carbon accounting, carbon crediting. And what I find really, really fascinating about them is like how they develop like deep technology on like measuring like how forests actually work and how carbon is stored in forests, etc. And then they develop really novel tech. And I think I would just like to have like an unfair channel, an innovative channel into like this kind of realm of technology, because I believe like that forests will be one of the most relevant and important and anyways, but also like valuable assets within the next 20 years. And then I want to understand how we like technologize them. And I think they're doing a pretty good and pretty important job there. Yeah.
That's really interesting. It's not really a topic that you really hear too much about. So essentially for you, no, yeah, 100%. So essentially for you, it's something that, you're passionate about, you're interested about, and you really see the potential for. That's the kind of element that you look at, which is obviously, I think, a really cool way to have a perspective on. So Philipp, I guess the kind of final wrap-up question for me is, what's next? Like, obviously for yourself, you've been an entrepreneur, you're currently an investor. what's the next step that for you would kind of look like?
Yes, so as I said before, I do have a non-linear career, and I really like this. So at the moment, I take time to explore different fields with different teams, and also try to find new ways of working and try to expand my mind into like areas that I did not yet understand, especially in terms of working, which is interesting. So I would say that I will land on like the topic of forests or the topic of people,
Okay.
in an venture building capacity or an investor capacity.
No, that's awesome. That's really interesting. It'll be really interesting also to kind of see, the exciting things that you do next. I think there's obviously stuff for us to kind of keep an eye out for. But look, Philip, I think this has been an extremely interesting episode. We covered quite a lot of things, stuff that's new to myself, stuff that I'm sure will be new to a lot of people listening. I really thank you for taking some time out of your day to record a podcast episode with myself. And thank you very much for being on the VC Corner.
Thank you, Ori. It was great to talk to you. Very interesting.
Thank you, everyone. This has been the VC Corner. You can find links to my LinkedIn. You can find links to Philip's LinkedIn below. A little bit more information about both of us as well in the description. And I thank you very much for choosing to listen in.